That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Conversations with a Killer, the Jeffrey Dahmer Tapes, which is the third season, I guess, by our new resident serial killer scholar, Joe Berlinger, in the Conversations with a Killer series, following Ted Bundy and John Wayne Gacy. That last one, which premiered earlier this year and we also reviewed, will be available to stream on Netflix October 7th, 2022.
So, I think I feel the same way about this one as I felt about John Wayne Gacy, specifically because I knew a lot about these murders beforehand. So, and then also having watched the Ryan Murphy series on Netflix about Jeffrey Dahmer. I feel a little oversaturated. Because, yeah.
I'm a little Dahmered out. He's a hard person to spend time with, and it's just depressing. But
Well, specifically because both are on the same platform, so I'm assuming someone who has... Actually, I would recommend, if someone's interested, watching this first, meaning the Jeffrey Dahmer tapes, then watching the Ryan Murphy series.
yes, which fleshes out and takes liberties, of course, as a dramatic piece of art.
But having watched the Ryan Murphy series, having watched probably everything on YouTube related to Jeffrey Dahmer, watching this little like 3-part documentary series didn't really illuminate much.
It's and each episode is the 3 episodes. Each one's about an hour long.
So the basis around this are some audio recordings done by a member of Jeffrey Dahmer's defense team.
Of which there were only 2 people.
And it's a woman named Pamela.
Wendy Patrickus.
Wait, what's her name?
Wendy.
Oh, you said Pamela when I asked you.
I don't know what you were talking about.
Anyway, we're told that there are 32 hours worth of audio recordings. Broken up into 3 episodes. There's a lot thrown in there, some of which I felt was kind of like... My overall note is I would have just preferred to have access to the 32 hours.
Sure.
And I would totally listen to them like I listen to podcasts.
Well, I was interested in hearing this woman speak on it now, you know.
And her, someone who had such a connection to this person talking about how she felt, and she does. I feel like that's really all I needed. I didn't need all the extra stuff. Also, I feel like we're never going to understand why Jeffrey Dahmer killed those people. So it's just hearing the same questions asked over and over again in different ways from the different movies and we're just never going to understand.
And yes, in a way that makes sense to us. Like he explains in a way that made sense to him in his mind.
Right.
But is of course aberrant in human behavior. So
could I just go through? I made notes for each episode.
Okay.
So episode 1, we're introduced to the lawyer. It was her first job as an attorney. I think
she said she was 25.
Yeah, young, and can you imagine?
And then think in 1991, this is the same year as Silence of the Lambs and kind of the Clarice Starling aspect,
which she referenced, saying that she felt like that. We're also introduced to a person, this man who used to be a television reporter in Milwaukee. Do you recall his name?
No,
he really rubbed me the wrong way.
I was irritated because he was doing
way too much. It's like he still thinks he's on TV. I don't know if he thought he was interviewing for a gig, but he's doing a little bit too much.
As was Pam Bass's husband. I thought was exaggerating a lot.
What's his name? Vernell. Yeah, we can get to him because we're introduced to him more in episode 2. But
I'm assuming Pam is dead. I forgot to look that up. Because why wouldn't we speak with her? But
I mean, so then for episode 1, something I didn't know is that Jeffrey Dahmer's grandmother, and I'm talking like for anyone who watched this probably already knows a lot about him, that Jeffrey Dahmer at a point lived with his grandmother and killed people in her house. But one of the law enforcement agents said that the grandmother, in the Ryan Murphy series, we get the sense that the grandma kind of knew something was weird. But the way they present in this is like she knew something was going on in her house. She just didn't want to know what it was. So they were a little more explicit about that. I thought that was creepy. Episode 2, we highlight some things that I wasn't super aware of, like that Jeffrey had sort of become interested in like sadistic things and like incantations. And this is the first time I've heard anyone go beyond just him being evil. Which then relates to like him being really into like The Exorcist 3, and then also wanting to emulate the Emperor from Return of the Jedi, which is why he would wear those yellow contacts.
Which is so creepy to think. The yellow contacts, I think, only come up once in the Ryan Murphy series.
And it kind of feels like, oh, he's just being a weirdo, but
And they were in his apartment. It's like, to think that he was out there roaming around
the gay bars,
with them yellow eyes. Like,
that's
okay.
creepy. Then we also know about that incompetent ass judge from when Jeffrey was convicted of like sexual misconduct with that 14-year-old boy. That judge gave him like the most minimal sentence, which we all know. But then the clinical psychologist who was present at that, who gave testimony at that hearing, said that he had recommended that they put him in jail for as long as they can because he is sick. So I thought that was interesting.
Well, and then listening to how that man described his behavior is interesting in comparison to how forthcoming Dahmer was when he was finally apprehended in July of '91, because he just started talking, and that's a much different portrait of him at that point.
One of the victims, a gentleman named Tony, we have one of his friends on. And I had heard this person talk, I think he gave an interview once before to like some British documentary series, because I've seen him talk before. But in this series, we really get a sense of like, he paints a picture of like the night he last saw his friend, and how he never says I met Jeffrey Dahmer. He refers to him as like this blonde man, but we know that he's talking about Dahmer, and he had breakfast with him with his friend and then dropped them off and never saw his friend again. I think that's probably the hardest part of this series, like the part that bothered me the most.
Well, and the effect that it had on his life,
Yeah.
because he was a main suspect in the disappearance of this man, and he had to relocate, and everybody cast aspersions upon his own behavior because of that. And
because the police asked him to like escort them to the gay bars to try to find this blonde man,
and we're not discreet at all.
No, so that got him into kind of like, bad or on the outs with the bar owners.
It's interesting because here is a queer person that lived in this period saying that the relationship between the gay community and the police was, tense.
Yeah.
It was not good. Whereas you have all these law enforcement officials and even the prosecuting attorney years later saying like, oh, no, this wasn't racism. This wasn't homophobia.
Yeah, I was really unsatisfied by that rhetoric because there's no one there to challenge it. There is one gentleman, a black man who wrote for a Milwaukee publication, who's trying to counter that, but his voice feels so small compared to these other voices saying like...
Well, because they have a bigger platform.
But they really downplay... But that is one of my next notes. That at the peak of Dahmer's killing in the early 90s, that was also sort of the peak of like gay men dying of AIDS. So it was like the perfect storm for this serial killer to target this group of people, especially people of color who were gay, who just go missing. It's like people really didn't question it much because a lot of people were just dying out of the blue from AIDS. So that was the first time I think I'd ever heard, I could have thought of that on my own had I, but, the first time hearing someone actually say that was kind of hit me hard.
Yes, and there was a headline, I think, in there about Milwaukee being the South Africa of the Midwest or something as well. And it's, I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and there was you could tell that
It was segregated.
There's segregation in the gay community.
Yeah. Then you mentioned Vernell, who was a neighbor of Jeffrey Dahmer, and I thought that gentleman was very bizarre. He talks about Jeffrey Dahmer like he had a crush on him.
Well, he called him a friend, which is interesting because the interactions that you then talk about are like, well, you're not really friends.
But I think also some people aren't prepared to talk on camera and not put on a performance. So I think part of it's that, but yeah, that was kind of bizarre.
And they kept showing the one picture of him from that period where he's like kind of peering by door 213.
Yeah, there's a lot of repetitive imagery. I'll get to that in the last episode, which is episode 3. So we learned that Dahmer liked to troll the local mall. So he would go to the mall with his camera and take pictures of guys and talk to them. I wasn't aware that he was that visible. I thought he was just like trolling the gay bars. In the in the series, we're told that the two officers who were the ones who found that Asian boy, who then gave that young man back to Dahmer, and then that boy died. In the series, the Ryan Murphy series, we're told that they get suspended, then reinstated, then given an accommodation. We know that the accommodation was not true, but in this they say they were actually fired.
And they appealed.
Then they were brought back
With back
pay.
With back pay.
Yeah, with back pay. So that's frustrating. So we don't get a lot of the actual recordings. If there are 32 hours in a 3-hour miniseries, we probably only get maybe like 10 minutes worth of Jeffrey Dahmer talking. It's not a lot. And then the more graphic details, they aren't said. Like, it's not audio. We have to read it. And so I thought that was, I'm assuming for ratings purposes, maybe they can't be too explicit, but we do hear the female lawyer say that Dahmer at one point, because he was killing so often, that he said that he would have to take showers
with bodies in the tub
while there were 2 bodies in the tub waiting for him to dispose of. That's wild as hell.
And also interesting that he divulged to her the bit about the drill.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, he was very forthcoming to the police, but he apparently didn't feel comfortable enough to divulge the whole, like, trying to make them zombies thing. He told that to this female lawyer.
And it's funny, they do play a clip of that audio where he almost kind of walks it back. He wants to know that it's okay to talk about.
And he's very matter of fact.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I'm not a mental health professional, but I think it just... That man was sick. Like, so obvious.
Somebody described him as like witnessing the shell of a human. And I think that is probably the most apt description of it. He's just this killing machine that had this sexual urge to fulfill.
Well, because we really don't have... I mean, this is the first time... Not the first time. I've watched every interview available of Jeffrey Dahmer. And he does come across as, like, very... like, almost void of...
Yeah, anybody that describes him as like, oh, he was floored to hear that those two were brothers or blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, I don't know how evident it is that he is surprised or shocked at anything, but...
We also see that we see a picture Jeffrey Dahmer drew of, like, the shrine he wanted to ultimately make of, like, from the skeletons, the bones of his victims, that I thought was really creepy. Yeah.
Well, because they were trying to... in court, his defense was trying to say that he was insane. And so that he would, not go to prison per se.
The prosecution offered up details like the shrine, like it was premeditated. They also talk about how he had set up, which I didn't know, a bunch of fake security cameras to help deter people from breaking into his apartment and then obviously seeing all the stuff.
Just like when he was with his grandmother and he would put the head in... what is it, Tony Sears' genitals in his locker at work because he knew that they wouldn't be found there, whereas grandma snooping would have discovered it. So he knew what he was doing. He knew where he could get the best result. He was a predator. He went to certain places, preyed on certain people. I mean...
We also hear the lawyer telling him, like, the female lawyer saying, like, begging with him, like, do not ask to go into general population. Like, you will be killed. And he's, like, adamant that he wants to, because he's saying that he's like a social person and he can't flourish by himself. And it's so odd to hear him talk like, you do know that you, like, brutally murdered ... like 70 people. And yeah, he's like, I feel like I'm going crazy in here.
I know. And then her response being like, we don't need more death. Don't do... Well, okay.
There is sort of talk, which we already knew, that there was speculation that the corrections people at the prison Jeffrey Dahmer was in allowed this prisoner to attack him, but that's not news. And then we get talk of, like, which I think just my own conclusion was, like, even if no one wants to say that Jeffrey Dahmer was racist, because, I mean, it's hard. That's a conversation that could be had for a long time. I do think that the social construct at the time provided this man with a playground to commit these crimes.
For sure.
Like, because there's a lot of talk about the police weren't racist, like you already mentioned. It's like, okay, fine, but their attitude towards black people, lower income people, homosexuals definitely allowed for a lot of this shit to go unchecked.
That they didn't respect them or care about them or give them any thought whatsoever.
So it's like, you can say you're not racist, you're not homophobic, whatever.
Sure.
That's fine, but you still didn't do your job. And we
Right.
need to examine why you didn't do your job. And it's because these attitudes that you have towards these groups of people that may be subconscious, but they're there.
And it's, I think Dahmer revisiting him so heavily, being saturated with these new documentaries and television series, it's a reminder that these social constructs out there, they're not meant to protect all of us, and that we need to do a better job of looking out for one another. Like when we're out and about, we need to be cognizant of our own surroundings and safety, and give a shit about people that are around you, that you're dealing with, that you're taking home, that you're having sex with. Do you know their name? Do you know their last name? Do you care if they have any kind of, when's the last time they're tested? Do you care if they got the monkeypox vaccine? It's just, like those are all of the upsetting things, and how just disconnected we've come to feel, even though as gay people we've already survived a plague. I don't know. It's just,
I always say, like, if you are going to go hook up with someone, text me. If you're a stranger out there, you can text me and say, I'm going to go hook up with someone. This is their address. If I don't know you, I don't care. Send me the text or the DM and Instagram, whatever. And then, if I don't hear from you, I'll respond like, where are you? And I mean, we don't do that. No one does that.
No one does that. And
so,
it's, it is easy to do. It is easy to let someone take a picture of a license plate or be like,
yeah, send it to me. I'll follow up. Watch me get a bunch and then I get overwhelmed. No, it won't. That won't happen. But, yeah, stay safe out there. We did review the Ryan Murphy Netflix series on our podcast, so if people want to hear about that, they can go there for that.
I mean, that was more entertaining, but also exhausting, and I think there are discussions to be had about what, is the use or the point of, or maybe not everybody needs to watch that. I don't know, but there are really great things about that series. I think Niecy Nash's performance is excellent. I think Evan Peters did a really good job. I think Richard Jenkins, etc. But,
What would you give this series?
I think 2.5.
I would give it 2.5. It's okay. I think if a person is not familiar with Jeffrey Dahmer, then it would be illuminating.
Oh, and I really got tired of the cheesy graphics about disappearing into the video cassettes.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because, there's this visual that is used multiple times throughout the 3 episodes of, like, us watching the cassette recorder, and then we dive into the cassette and see the actual tape.
Which looks like fruit leather, but
It doesn't even look that great.
I mean, it just maybe once, like every time they start talking. No.
Anything else?
No.
Hit the thanks button. Listen to our podcast. Bye.